hello to everyone in my name and name of Maja Valentić and Nejc Lebar. And first of all, a big thanks to the organizers for taking us here to be able to present our project. And also a big thanks to the jury to read carefully through our project in what we think is a thoughtful way of understanding it. And today I would just like to present a couple of our positions that we try to articulate through the project that we think are extremely important, and explain why we dealt with the project as we did. And the starting point is that every single event occurs in a specific place. The event and the place are tied. And not even, but it's even more important with such a catastrophic and gigantic event as the Babyn Yar in 1941 to 1943, and also later was. So the site is intrinsically linked to what happened. And of course, our position is that topography of the site is the reason why this thing happened on this specific spot. Of course, this event doesn't have a site anymore. It does have a geographical point where it happened, but the site has been completely changed, and willingly so, but also out of many other reasons. And this was recognized, the importance of the topography of this strange natural phenomenon that were used as a tool of destruction, as a tool of murder, as a murder tool, literally, was recognized early on, even before the area was filled completely, in this 1965 project by Josif Karakis and Aba Milecki that we found interesting. It deals with topography as an intrinsic part of the proposed part of Babyn Yar area, memorialization of the area, but was then, as you know, although partly destroyed by the Germans during the war, it was finally erased by the Soviet Union, but also by the urbanization of the area. And even further on, the pluralization of the memory that we talked, or that we heard something before, happened, in which all sorts of possible identifications of all sorts of possible groups were made, some contrary to the other, and this kind of fragmentation of the memory is definitely something that we didn't want to continue, or just put another object to complement the other 30. So we tried to identify the problem as not as we have a lot of monuments, but we just didn't find the right one yet. It was more of the monuments are here, but the site has disappeared. It's the thing that's intrinsic, that's vital to the events here, that is missing. So for us, it was not so much what to build or what to create. It's a lot more about what to make visible, what to rescue from oblivion. It's something that's especially important for the Holocaust, but also specifically important for this area here, because the site itself is missing. So we have this site that's not there anymore, that it's destroyed irreversibly. It's not just hidden. If one would excavate the area, one would have to reconstruct it. The traces are still there, but you just don't have the area that would be authentic in that sense. And we thought that the approach that would be reasonable to take is a kind of act, architectural or landscape act of resistance to oblivion. So how to resist to oblivion of the site? And this is the area that was used as killing fields, where topography was used as killing fields, and was throughout the war and up to the 70s later on hidden and destroyed and leveled and so on. So this is the area of the ravine that's not existing anymore. And we thought that we should think about it as a kind of excavation, not real excavation, because as I said, if one would excavate this, one would never get, one would get distorted traces, yes, but one would not get to the point zero, to something authentic, but as a virtual excavation site, or if you will, even better, as a virtual forensic site. It's a scene of a crime, and we built a virtual forensic net of 10 by 10 meters, which is used either in archaeological sites or in forensic, or with forensic teams, that cover the whole of the area. It doesn't make specifics onto single sites like the Soviet memorial did or the other 29 memorials over the site. It covers the totality of the area. Because of that, we also exceeded the boundary of the competition a little bit on the sides, went on the other side of the road into areas, I think, because what is sensible to follow here is what the topography was like then, not what it is now. You know, the roads weren't there in 1941. And this net, we marked this net with markers on the intersections. So the whole area is marked on the intersections by small markers throughout the site. It's 2,650 of these markers that we can cover the whole area, which is 18.5 hectares in total. And you can see that the area goes further, like I said, further from the roads, into residential areas as well, into the forest, which is unkept presently. So it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't choose the right area to memorialize. It covers everything that was used as killing fields, or it covers everything that is reasonable to think that were killing fields. We don't know for sure, and we never will know exactly which parts have been and which parts haven't been used. So we should cover the whole thing that was covered up. In this sense, this, rather than a monument, I would say, memorialization landscape is a vast monument. It's extremely big, but at the same time, because these markers are very small, it's also almost invisible. It achieves both extremes, at least we think so, of being very discreet, but also so large that you can't ignore it. Once you stumble upon one of these markers, you then see the next one, and then you see the next one, and you can't ignore it, even if you just drive through it. Here is a small portion of the area near the subway station, where you can see that we didn't discriminate the areas of the park to that of the road, or to the pavement, or indeed to that of the other memorials. It goes, the landscaping, or this additional layer that we've put on, goes on every and each of these surfaces. So even if you just drive through, you see them. Now, to explain that this is not only a two-dimensional marking of the area of the ravine, I will use here a section of a small area, which we have, as far as we've researched, we've seen that there exist quite sufficient topographical measurements of the area from before the war. So one can establish the depth of the ravine with certain precision on every of these spots. And you can see here the markings. Sorry, I don't have a pointer. Yes. The markings, 10 by 10 meters. And each of those doesn't only measure the surface, also measures the depth. Which is extremely important in our view, because it communicates that to anyone there in a universal language of mathematics, which is not a projective language, but it's understandable to everyone. One doesn't choose the language or the way how it's written. It's just a number, but it's a number minus 10 point something. That's at the same time a little bit strange, but also intelligible to everyone. There is, or there was, something beneath you, and you can't ignore that when you walk upon it. And with this area, we basically map the whole area of the ravine in 3D virtually. So throughout the area, you feel the depth that was hidden, both literally, but also not so literally, and the vastness of this event. Topographical vastness, but also the vastness of and the tragedy of the event itself. And what you end up with is a net of these marks with numbers, which may seem very objective, which may seem very virtual, but our position is that numbers superimposed on the surface is far from objective. It's engraving into the zero level of something that was meant to be suppressed so hard for decades. And engraving that permanently on the zero level, I would argue that it is definitely abstract, but far from objective. It prevents oblivion of this event, and it doesn't put it on site, or it doesn't create a special little area where you commemorate the events like we heard once per year, but it's everywhere, and it's included into the daily life, and you can't ignore it even if you just drive through the area. It's there, and you need to live with it on the commemorative days, but also just every single day. It's the measure of success as we perceive our monument or our memorial landscape is how well you're able to live with your own history daily, not just on the 75 years of the event. So these marks are then left in whatever point they occur, for instance, in the forest, on the paths, on the roads, and to just signify how what a kind of a marker we had in mind. It's meant to be 15 by 15 centimeters, stainless steel element with engraving of the depth of the original ravine on it. So, as I said, barely noticeable, but when you stumble upon it, you can't never ignore it. And there are 2,650 of them. In the end, we end up with this landscape that is basically the same as it is now. It was our position that even though the area of Babyn Yar and the park that covers the part of the area, but far from the whole area, and any kind of functional problems that the park definitely has, are not intrinsically tied to the design of the memorial and shouldn't be. I don't think that we can solve both with the same stroke. We should, I suppose, solve both, but they are not intrinsically tied to each other. The monument, I don't think, should be, there to solve the problems of maintenance, because the area is designed in a way, maybe not in the best way, but it could function better if it would be maintained. And I don't think that the success of the monument or this interpolation is tied to that explicitly. Also, we have a position on the other catastrophes, or namely on the catastrophe that is also vast and horrendous, but that didn't happen during the Second World War at Kurinuka, that it should be memorialized, but as these events are memorialized on the spot where they happened, perhaps it would be sensible to memorialize Kurinuka disaster on the sense where, on the spot where most people lost their lives. As I understand it, and as we understand it from our research, that happened a little bit more to the north. So in order not to confuse the memorialization of the area, I think it would be better to solve that separately. But maybe our research hasn't been, maybe we missed something. But I think that's also sensible in ways of confusing different memories and different events. So we have this landscape, as you can see from the visualizations, that is the same as it is now. And yet, we would say that it is fundamentally transformed, that you can never perceive it the same because of these markers, because of this virtual mapping, virtual engraving of the missing element, of the suppressed element, and that is vastly different from what it is there now. I would say that any successful monument is a communal gesture, or a collective act, or the building of it. It's a consensus of the community that's needed to erect something, or to build something, or to make something visible. But I would say also that after it is built, it should enable every single one to remember the events on the individual basis. So not to engrave in stone, this is how we perceive it, because in that way, the monument takes on our remembrance. The monument is there to remember instead of us. And I don't think that is a very successful thing to do, to just redelegate the memory. Rather, I would say, construction of the monument is something that is collective, but the act of remembering that is done together with the monument or together with the landscape is then, or should be, a very individual act open to different people in different ways because of complexity of the event. We're looking forward to the other presentations as well and to any comments further on. So thank you.
Okay, good morning. Sorry.
Шановні колеги, ми одразу будемо просити після презентації кожній команді вручати сертифікати відповідні, і це будемо просити пана Джеймса Темерта. Я прошу вас на сцену нагородити цю команду.
Okay, so good morning. Okay.
Дякую. Тепер я прошу до слова представника команди, що посіла ще одне друге місце. Це франко-колумбійська команда, а представляти проєкт буде французький архітектор Pouliquen.
So thank you to the jury and the organizers for the award and the invitation. So I worked on this project with Edgar Matho, who's a Colombian architect who cannot be here tonight. So I'm going to start the presentation by explaining why we decided to enter the competition. So the question of working on a memorial site through a landscape intervention, not through building a new monument, seemed to be really interesting for us because memory is not a rigid thing. It does not correspond to the fixity of a monument, and it shares the same nature than landscape to be a really shifting thing and to have a really dynamic nature. We found some really interesting text or reflections that we read to research this relation between landscape and memory, and we found these two quotes that are for us really important and the basis of our reflection. So, where site applies stasis, landscape implies metamorphosis. So we start to research how history had impacted landscape, and the tool we used to make this research was to make a model of the topography of the site and to understand that on the site there were two ravines that were kind of twins ravines, and one was erased from the geography of Kiev to erase part of history. And so it's really a landscape that bears the marks of history. We started also to map all the events that occurred in the second part of the 20th century, and to work on the notion of palimpsest. Palimpsest is, in the medieval time, paper was a really scarce resource, so the monks, to write a new text, were erasing a former text and writing again on the text. So when now you look at these papers, they bear the marks of the former writings, and they have different layers on them. And it's the same on this site, different layers of history. So you have, like, for instance, the layer of the topography that has been erased. You have the layers of the cemeteries that has been destroyed, the layer of the catastrophe of the flood that occurred later with the rupture of the dike. And so we were wondering how to reveal all these layers through a landscape intervention. On this side, there is a spatial organization that is really powerful. Is the one, it's the grid, because the grid is the common organization for different types of cemeteries, no matter the religion. It's a way of organizing the individual with the multitude, with a group. And we also realized that a grid was also an archaeological tool, and this tool in archaeology was used to show the relation between two layers of history, because between two layers of time. So what we found interesting, it was that this grid, these fragments that are revealed, they talk about what is present and at the same time about what is absent. So we decided that we were going to use this really abstract structure that is the grid to ask about, to talk about what is present and what is absent, and to work with fragments of these different layers. So we decided to work on different fragments of the different layers of history that were really significant. So for instance, some of the fragments that are showed on the document at the right, some of them are the entrances to the ravine where the Jews were forced to go before the massacre. Others of these fragments represent the dike that was destroyed and that and where the flood occurred. The other are the different part of the cemeteries that are still visible, and that's how we built the structure of the project, by putting the emphasis on different fragments of these different layers. And for us, this organization allows the project to shift in time, and it keeps a coherence between the different intervention and participate to make the unity of the site. So we decided to make a typology of fragments that all refers to a different layer of history. It doesn't work. Okay. Okay. Okay, so that's the map of the different existing monuments that, how it has been said, there is a lot of different monuments all along the site. And the idea Okay, so the idea was to unify them by planting a hedge to create a more intimate space around each monument, more suitable for commemoration or remembrance. And at the same time, it creates a common vocabulary around these distinctive monuments to create a unity. The other type of fragments are made to evoke the disappeared topography. So it recreates on a really abstract geometrical structure this disappeared topography. And what we wanted to create is an aesthetic of rupture, of contrast between the former topography and the actual topography. The other layer that disappeared is the water system of the ravine. With the leveling work that has been made, there is no more the riverbed that used to exist. So one of the questions that was asked in the brief was to address the landslide risk. And this can be made by creating a drainage system. And we used this drainage system to recreate some fragments of this water system that disappeared, and to evoke this link between underground water and surface water. One of the really important theme during the reflection was how to how to combine a recreational park with a memorial park. And we decided that there was two different paths, a memory path and a public path. And there was really separate, but at the same time we needed to work on the intersection between the two webs of path. So we decided to keep on working with the topography and to make the memory path always goes down the public path. So always to have some layer of history that is underneath the actual topography. And the other theme that was really important for us was the connection between the site with the urban context. Because right now, the site is only connected to the city by this entrance on the metro station. But we realized that there are some neighborhoods that are surrounding the site, for instance, on the southern part, that are totally disconnected from the site. So for us, the objective is really to connect these by the integration between the little parks that are at the foot of these buildings with the big part that is Babyn Yar Memorial Park. And to do this, we marked some points that were key in the articulation between the different parts of the site that right now are really fragmented. And to do this, we decided that we were not going to make big infrastructures out of nowhere, but we were going to look at the opportunities that already exist on site. For instance, you have the metro station that is like a roof terrace where people can climb. And this is the first part of the ramp that can cross the street. And it's so the strategy was seeing what are the points of opportunity to build this connection. And also we thought that these connections are not only physical, but the connection between the different parts of the site are made also by the reutilization, the reuse of the materials produced on site. For instance, there is an intervention that recreates, in a way, the central meadow that was Babyn Yar Park before the leveling work. And all the trees that are cut to open this space are the ones that are reused in the construction of furniture, of infrastructure. And this way, there was this idea of resilience and of a park that draws itself on its own resources. For instance, this was the idea that this park is not a finished result, it's a process. And because landscape is a process, is something dynamic. So by having a management of the park, by having an intervention that is all along the year, you also keep this memory alive. And the idea is to take care of this place, to show interest to this place to maintain the memory alive. And as a conclusion, I would like to zoom out and to look at what is this site on a territorial scale. Because what we can see if you zoom out is that Babyn Yar is one of the ravine in Kiev city, but there are a lot of ravines. And when you map them, you realize that they built a connection between the Dnieper River with the woodland that are located on the north west part of the city. And the idea here is to integrate Babyn Yar that has always been considered as a margin, to integrate it in a park structure at the scale of the city and make it important in the structure of the city. Thank you.
Дякую. І я прошу на сцену пана Темертея для вручення сертифікату. Я прошу на сцену команду, що посіла третє місце на нашому конкурсі. Це американська команда, яку представлятимуть Мiriam Gusevich та Пітер Майлз. Прошу.
My name is Miriam Gusevich, and this is Peter Miles. We are, of course, like everybody else, very thankful to have the opportunity to share our work with you, to have the opportunity, and in particular, thank the people of Kiev, the committee that organized it, and I'd also like to point out Maja and Raya and also Anna Bondar for helping us along the way. So we're very grateful to be here. I'd like to briefly introduce our team. Jay Gabriel, who is one of my colleagues and a very beautiful artist. Myself is here, and Peter. Jay couldn't join us, but he's here in spirit. This project for us, and especially for me personally, is really a labor of love. I was very moved 2 years ago by the events of Euromaidan. As a child of the Cuban Revolution, I understand firsthand the experience that the people of Ukraine have endured with the communist regime. And I have a lot of personal empathy with the Ukrainian people. And so this was one of the reasons that we participated in the previous competition, for which we also, as you can see from this drawing, happened to be the area right in front of this building. So we were very touched by that. But furthermore, as a grandchild of Holocaust victims, I have a personal interest in Babyn Yar. And so the question for us was, how do we tell the story of Babyn Yar? How we allow the landscape to tell the story? And so we listened. We encountered a Holocaust detective story The crimes of the Nazi genocide of Jews and other victims are well known. The crime scene remains erased by design. Criminal Nazi and communist regimes were determined to conceal and deny the magnitude of the crime. The most significant missing clue is the ravine at Babyn Yar, hidden under multiple layers of desecration and denial. Our design intervention recovers the outlines of the original ravines without excavating. We understood that, that the site is a holy site and that it cannot be excavated according to halachic rules. So we use instead the possibility of selective clearance of the invasive trees and undercover plantings to create at least a feeling of enclosure of the ravine, even though we cannot excavate it. So we used as a layer of information the Nazi photographs, and we actually traced, what we saw is a kind of S-shape, I don't know if you can see it, that creates a kind of sequence through the site. And we looked at as a kind of arc that connects the monument that the Russians built at one end with the menorah at the other end, and has, basically sort of frames the sort of area where most of the monuments are located. We also,
We'll keep it on that. Do you want the next one?
yeah, this is just a sort of general view of the aerial photograph, of the aerial view of the site, creating this kind of arc that connects the two main monuments at either end. What, the next one? Is that it? Yeah, here's just another view.
And then do you want to? But then I'll start that. Do you want to go to the next one?
Yeah. Well, should I say about the dark side?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and then the other, in addition to sort of framing the sort of overall sort of boundaries, the sort of virtual boundaries of the ravine, our other important concept was the idea of transforming the killing fields by a field of yard-side candles that illuminate the path. The yard-side candles is the name for the traditional Jewish the Jewish tradition of using candles to remember the dead. And we don't see these as actual literal candles, but rather as lights that sort of create a kind of virtual sense of the topography. And we also imagined that there would be both structured pilgrimage routes that retrace the path, the Via Dolorosa, from Lukiani Square to Babyn Yar, but that there also would be a very informal way that people would experience the site, and Peter Miles will address that now.
Hi, everyone. So as Miriam said, she has a very personal connection. I actually have no personal connection to this. So one of the things that kind of came up as Miriam and the team were working on the project is that when Miriam would talk about this site and the things that happened, it became evident very quickly that she had a very different understanding, because talking about 34,000 people that are killed is an incomprehensible number of people. For Miriam, those were her grandparents. There's a personal reference for who they were. And we really wanted to try to kind of create an approach for the site that allows you to understand the many, many complexities. One of the things that came to mind as we were doing this is a quote by a famous American president, Abraham Lincoln, during the Gettysburg Address. And I think it perfectly sums up the humility necessary to work on this project. So the quote is, "But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far beyond our poor power to add or detract." And I think that perfectly sums up the issues of how the site has been approached so far with individual monuments that don't quite sum everything up. So it's really about how can we approach this site in a way that is respectful and tells a story. So one of the things that we thought about that Miriam briefly touched on is this is a crime scene, and it's a detective story. So the way to tell the story of 34,000 individuals who were killed is, and to avoid generalizations and to avoid, just calling it another mass atrocity, is to understand it from the perspective of an individual. I approached this and I wondered, what would my life be like if I were a 24-year-old living in Ukraine at this time? How would it be different? How would I feel about the events going on? And I'm not Jewish, so I wouldn't have necessarily been involved. So I would have been living in that city, and this would have occurred while I was living there. So what would my experience have been? So the idea is that visitors, like detectives, can discover clues that could be placed throughout the site. As Miriam mentioned, it's really about kind of selective clearance to create these paths. The clues could be markers. You could have an app that is geolocated, and as you walk around, you get a new piece of information. And as you walk through this, imagine that you can find clues there, and it's just one piece, and they could be clues that could talk about the event. It could be, just a brief biography of one person who died in this massacre. Something that tells you a story on a personal level, so the unlimited number of stories that exist on this site can be told. And I think it's also important to keep in mind that, the thing about this site is it's not just one event that occurred. It's what happened before the event, the lead up. How did this event happen? How could it be that 34,000 people could be killed in 2 days? I'm from Annapolis, which is a kind of small town in the United States. The population of that town is about 30,000 people. That's the entire town. Everyone there disappearing in 2 days. It's incomprehensible. So we really wanted to figure out a way that you could understand these stories and understand these people. So you can have wander through this and learn about the individuals, and by learning about the individuals who were involved there, you can have clues that will start to add up to the much broader picture. We have these sort of deliberately vague in a way because this site is so big. And one of the things that's important is there are so many different stories that every time you go there, you experience a different aspect of the story. Maybe you experience it from the perspective of a different individual. Maybe you experience it every time you go there, your understanding can broaden a little bit and can become a little bit more deeper, which is really what was fruitful about working with Miriam, is that Miriam's understanding, I could see in talking to her, was so much more deep than the understanding I had of this site and the Holocaust and everything else that happened there. And as we talked to her, I said, I would like to be able to figure out how can I come closer to your understanding. I don't think I can achieve the understanding that people who have this direct relationship to the tragedy can have. But I think that I can gain a much deeper and much broader and a much more empathetic understanding of the tragedy and what occurred there and why it happened. So we have, this is, as Mary mentioned, the candles that can turn it into killing fields, or the killing fields turned into fields of candles. And one of the ideas with this is perhaps individuals would be able to actually have their own candle placed there in memory of someone who was lost. And that each piece that's added here contributes to the story. I think a very important idea about a story is still continuing. The story of Babyn Yar is something that is still happening now. This competition is part of the history of that story. Everything that happened with the Soviets is part of that story. To deny the desecration and the horrible things that happened is just continually making the massacre worse, to deny that it happened and to ignore it. But I think it's also extremely important to acknowledge that this has been covered up and the things that have happened and people's willful ignorance of the Holocaust and tragedies. We have tragedies today that are ongoing that people willfully deny. We have refugee crises. All of this is important. We need to know how to remember. We need to know how to understand someone who is not like us. This is just a view of the project at night. We imagined that this could be lit up and it would illuminate the path through the forest. And I think, could you play our video? We just have a short video that explains and kind of stitches everything together. So if you could go back to our presentations, we just have a few concluding slides. But I think kind of to summarize what our approach was, we feel that the site is very, very complicated, and there's certainly the contextual approach of the landscape, but critical in that approach is to create a context to understand the site. So the idea is, if you acknowledge that everyone who visits this site has a different experience, a different perspective, a different amount of knowledge of what happened, you can use that to enable an experience that is adaptive. You can create an experience that allows anyone to go to that site and they can leave knowing a little bit more. We can't teach everyone everything in one day, in one visit. We can just hope to have a learning experience. So these are just some photos of the model that we built because they kind of show off. It looks good because it's a cool model. And finally, we have our suggestion for next steps. As is mentioned in the program, there's complicated ownership structures with this, many other things going on. So one of the beauty, I think, if I can humbly say so, of our approach is that if you have something like a smartphone app that is geolocated and has clues throughout the site, you could make that today with no one's permission. You could have embedded within that app markers on the site, the stories of the people who were there, information about what happened, and as you walk through the site, people can learn. And you could also have this be interactive. People could suggest their own additions to the story. You could open this up and you could have people submit testimony, have survivors. Anyone who has something to contribute can contribute to this story, and you should be able to access this through the app as you walk through the site. And I think Miriam will talk about the contribute portion.
Yes, we also suggest that maybe the installation of the yard-side candles could be something where people can contribute from all over the world, can contribute towards making this a reality by actually donating funding and having the sense of individual contribution or their family's contribution by essentially funding each one of these installations, which I will define again. They are really LED solar panels that would light up with, with the different, would respond to the weather. They are not necessarily literal candles. So.
And that basically concludes our project. We think it's important to tell the story, it's important to remember, and it's important to remember that this story is still ongoing. Thank you very much.
Дякую, прошу до нагородження. Шановні колеги, перед тим, як ми почнемо ставити і відповідати на запитання, я прошу сюди у президію по одному представнику кожної команди, а також шановного пана Олів'є Філіпа, щоб було кому відповідати на ваші питання. Прошу ставити запитання.
Hello. Hi. Thank you so much for your amazing presentations. So I think it's very fascinating to see the diverse groups that expressed, felt personal need or expressed interest in the project. And all of you had to do the research, obviously, to come up with these projects. But I was wondering if some of you could reflect how going through the actual competition, seeing the competition outcome, and maybe even seeing other projects has changed or affected your understanding of the site and the history surrounding it. Thank you.
Could you repeat your question?
Yeah, sorry. Is in English okay, the question?
Yeah, it's okay.
Yes.
If you don't speak too fast, it's okay for me.
Sorry, no problem. All of you came into the project having done your research about the site. So you have formed some opinions about it and learned some history. But I'm interested to know whether going through the competition, through the process, the selection process, as well as seeing the outcome of the competition and seeing other projects that have participated had in any way changed your understanding of the site and the history that surrounds it, the site being Babyn Yar.
I wouldn't say that it has changed our understanding. I think from my opinion, which is only mine, not the entire jury, it has comforted my opinion about the site and the history. So I'm very pleased that the three first prizes were exactly my choice. So it's the work that they propose, the project that they propose, is something that probably, if I had to be one of the competitors, I would probably have worked on the same way. So more or less. About the history, it's a fact that before I was involved in the jury as a citizen from France. Of course, I knew what was Babyn Yar, but I didn't know exactly the intensity of the crime. And when I went on the site, when I went along the Rhine, the still existing ravine, I was submerged by a very strong emotion, and at some point I was, it's a very difficult thing because I'm 62 years old, and my father did the war. He was involved in the war, fortunately on the good side. But suddenly, it is something that submerges you. It's very close, and we're all involved, and it questions something essential. Questions us something essential is our humanity, and this is not only; it's everybody. So I learned about history, about our collective responsibility. I learned, but about the competition, and I mean how to respond. How to, as a landscape architect, yes, I'm very happy of the response, and I would have worked on the same way, and I think it's very relevant what they have done, and I hope that they will be in a situation to continue in I don't know how, but I hope so.
I think for me, one of the things that's been really interesting that I kind of touched on when I was talking is learning so much more about this and having a deeper understanding. It's a little bit coming over to Europe, and I've been here. This is my first time to Kiev. As an American, World War II and the Holocaust they're events that you learn about, but there's no physical evidence in the United States of the destruction of World War II. So to come over here and to see that and to meet people and to learn from the different people who've put together these projects and to see how people who have, who live in areas that were physically impacted by the war and by the Holocaust, it's very interesting to learn from that. And I think there's a lot to be gained from seeing those different perspectives.
Okay, I would maybe just add in a similar way as you have said before that I personally knew about the event itself, but the new thing about the research, also about visiting the site, was to know the historical context of what came before, but especially what came after, how the event itself was and still is traumatic in a way that it manifests spatially. So not so much in what is there, but what's not there, and how the city somehow, you know, coexists in this strange way with the you have the area that was clearly defined as a sacrificed site, but then you have the boundaries that have ignored it, and that has been happening at the same time. Also, the whole history of suppression after the Second World War was something completely new to me. I mean, we basically knew the scenes from the films about Babyn Yar from 1941 to 1943. Everything after that was rather new, also consequential, I think, to how we treated the project.
Okay, so about this process of research is, I think what is interesting is that all the teams that had been awarded are from abroad, so we had more or less the same way of making our research, and it's through the internet. And I think that this is also one of the limits of this exercise, is that if you were talking about what did we learn with looking at the other projects and things like this, I would say that for me the most important is what is going to follow is the visit of the site of, I think it's planned today or tomorrow. And I think this is the next step to the confrontation, to the physical reality of the site, because right now we have been kind of going through a really abstract process or a really abstract relationship with the site. And I think the next step is to really see all the small details or the identity of the site itself, and also to, I don't know, talk to the people that lives on the neighborhoods that surround the place, to see how they see this site, how they could be involved. So I think this is, a step to make the process less abstract and more, I don't know how to say that, but rooted.
Дякую. У вас питання? Прошу.
Так. Я Яна Rathman. I represent Ukrainian diaspora and Jewish community of San Francisco Bay Area. I was born in Kiev, and part of my family left in Babyn Yar, so this is very personal for me as well. First of all, I would like to thank the architects and the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter and James Timerty for the work that they're all doing. My question is actually not to the architects, but more to the representatives of the city administration and maybe Institute Nationalnej Pamяти. Every time I'm in Kiev, the last 25 or 30 years, I go to Babyn Yar. And the experience starts way before you get there, still in the metro or right when you exit the station. And there is absolutely no announcement in the metro that this is, has any connection to the Babyn Yar. When you get out there, there is no information or signs. And I would like to say that this is really, really important. These things don't have to wait until there are a lot of money or big decisions are made, but these little things they make, they have a lot of influence, and it's key to how you perceive, and people who visit Kiev and people who live in Kiev perceive the site. For example, there could be an announcement in the metro, there could be informational signs like they are now in front of the Miskarada, in front of the city hall. And I wanted to ask if there are any plans to kind of have this pre-experience even before big things are happening on the site itself. Sorry, I spoke in English, but I could repeat it if needed in Ukrainian.
Ну, про передчуття будуть відповідати учасники, а я буду відповідати за всю державу. Оскільки держава тут блискуче відсутня, то відповідати за неї буду я. Значить, насправді позиція нашої держави дуже проста стосовно Бабиного Яру. Якщо у вас є гроші, приходьте і робіть, що захочете. Ми вам не заважаємо, тобто ви нам не заважаєте, знаєте. Робіть, що хочете, ви нам не заважаєте. Я з зацікавленістю чекаю, чи прийде міністр культури, який обіцяв до нас завітати, що це ж буде певним знаком. Але справа в тому, що насправді, Інститут національної пам'яті останні 2 роки за нового керівництва, що від нього залежить, намагається робити, хочу віддати належне. Але від Інституту національної пам'яті залежить небагато. Національний заповідник Babyn Yar, така віртуальна істота, значить, підпорядкований Міністерству культури, а не Інституту національної пам'яті. Решта землі належить Київській міській державній адміністрації, яка більше впадає за грандіозними проєктами, типу побудувати, значить, грандіозний меморіальний комплекс, музей чи щось таке, що увічнить ім'я мера Києва, значить, назавжди. Він так собі вважає. Тому, значить, такі дрібниці, як дороговкази, оголошення у метро чи щось інше, що ви можете увічити свою власну пам'ять і що поставити дороговказ. У нас є такі депутати Київради, які ставлять лавку в сквері і пишуть: лавку поставлено депутатом таким-то. Нормально. Значить, але з іншого боку, що оголошувати на станції метро Дорогожичі? Ви прибули на місце розстрілів, де ми побудували станцію метро? Воно так і було. Да? Тобто загально відомо, що станція метро Дорогожичі побудована безпосередньо в епіцентрі колишніх розстрілів. І коли її будували і почали викопувати кістки, було терміново створено комісію вчену, до якої було залучено також вченого єврея при генерал-губернаторі. І комісія чітко встановила, що розстріли відбувалися не тут, де ми будуємо метро, а на 15 метрів лівіше. Розумієте, да? Тобто розстріли 100 тисяч людей відбувалися на 15 метрів лівіше. І от про все це, очевидно, треба оголошувати, коли ви під'їжджаєте до станції метро Дорогожичі. Дуже складна ситуація у нашої влади, в яку вона сама себе загнала з тією меморіалізацією пам'яті про Babyn Yar і його знищенням. І мені дуже цікаво, як вона буде виходити з цієї ситуації. Хоча, в принципі, кожна нова влада, перше, що вона каже, що вона не має стосунку до попередньої. Попередня влада була злочинною, вона крала, значить, вона все робила неправильно, ми зробимо правильно. Але чомусь правильно кожного разу виходить як у попередньої влади. Може, пороблено якось, я не знаю. А тепер, нехай наші учасники розповідуть, що вони відчувають, коли під'їжджають, не знаю, до Києва, до Бабиного Яру тощо.
So one of the things I think that we felt was really important about approaching this project is to create a kind of consistent contextual theoretical framework through which you can understand the site. So that was why we mentioned things like the smartphone app and ways that you can have an overall plan for the site, and you can have the master plan in every piece that you want to do, but also to be able to do small, immediate steps to help build awareness for the site and what happened there, and to help engage people in the public in that. Because, you know, anytime you need public approval for a project or something going on, you need the public in general to understand what you want to do and to be supportive of it. So we felt that regardless of the specific politics, if you're able to coherently communicate what you want to do with the site, why it matters, and what your approach is, the more people understand that, the more likely it is that you'll be able to kind of create a broader solution to the site. But I don't think it's ever really complete, and I think that's one of the pieces that's really interesting about this competition is I don't think that you can ever expect, you know, if people wanted to have, I think if the competition committee, our interpretation was, if they wanted to have something that would have a sense of finality to it, you would have just built a memorial, as opposed to having something that allows people to understand the site and the continued history of the site. So that was kind of our approach, and our idea is that you could have small steps, whether it's a smartphone app or signs you could put up or pamphlets you could hand out, something that begins to tell the story to people, and then it allows them to gain more understanding and hopefully creates broader awareness for the site and what should be done about it.
I actually had a opportunity to visit the site while we were doing the project, and I had a experience that was quite similar to what you described. I came into the area from the north through the woods, and I knew the site from all the information and the plans and so on. So I knew my way around, but the whole thing was very much searching for any kind of marks until I got to the area that I knew that there's a lot of memorials. And the first explanatory table was on the exact south, near the Soviet memorial. Before that, there was no announcements in any way except of the memorials that we knew from before, which is a telling thing. I mean, it also made us, the whole team, to think about you know, what to embed in a monument. It's a very difficult question. To say how to mark the space or the specific place, how to mark a specific event, to write it down on a monument is a thing that often changes in a generation time or even before that. And then you get a kind of a graveyard of monuments as well. And you just pile new ones up. So rather, our approach to that was making the marking of the site, to try to make the marking of the site a strong statement in itself. If something is marked, especially in the situation where you have so many areas that are sometimes willfully, sometimes unwillfully ignored, the marking itself, we would say, is a strong gesture, is a gesture of resistance. So what the core of our project is about is engraving this resistance into the terrain itself, to keep it there, while not engraving the way exactly how people should remember, especially how individuals should remember the events on it. And I think that would make a huge difference in how the site couldn't be ignored. It can easily be ignored right now if you don't come directly to a small portion that is a kind of a recreated Babyn Yar in a very small scale. You have even the ravine that's recreated around the Soviet memorial, for instance. That was basically our response to the lack of recognition, or lack of the spatial recognition that exists there.
A few minutes ago, I explained that I was submerged by emotion when I stay along the existing ravine. You don't say ravine, you say ravine. Yes, because finally the first weapon of the extermination was when it was not the guns, it was the ravine, and I could see it just in front of me, you know. But before being along the ravine, I have to walk through the park. And the park, because during decades, there was a denial of the history of when I was on the site. It is the site that showed me this very clearly. The ravine is the weapon of the examination, and it's partly still there. And so the history is all around the ravine, the hidden one, this zippered ravine, and the existing one.
So I think that the question is interesting about how you can communicate about Babyn Yar even when you're just passing in the metro or you're not right into the park. And I think, for instance, this question of the metro station is really a key element because it's the gate to the park. And I think it's a place of intervention, of a strong intervention, but I think it's not a question of putting like another monument or to write something on the walls. It's something way more dynamic, because I think if you make another monument or another inscription, a year later people are used to it and it becomes like just an element of the scenery that no one notices anymore. So I think it's allowing the next generation to make their own interpretation of the events, and for instance, asking an artist to make something on the wall every year. And I think it's the shifting of the memory, of the interpretation that can really work on this kind of site to always make it vivid or alive.
Прошу.
Сергій Нагорний, журналіст з Києва. Моє питання буде до експертів і до пана Віталія Нахмича. Будь ласка, скажіть, от ви знаєте, пане Віталію, ізнутрі тематику, як цей проєкт майбутній узгоджений? От ми знаємо, що КМДА запропонувала план міста, і як воно там співпадає з цим проєктом, тому що ми знаємо, що там ці дома, які прилеглі до тієї території, теж хочуть хрущовки ці знищити, щось там інші будівлі побудувати великі. І, будь ласка, тезово можете, експерти, відповісти, чим майбутній меморіальний проєкт має саме притягувати людей зі всього світу у позитивному слові цього?
Що стосується планів, насправді планів немає. Немає затвердженого генерального плану розвитку Києва, він готується вже багато років, ніяк його не підготують. Але основною відзнакою конкурсу, його конкурсного завдання є те, що він не передбачає ані знесення будь-яких наявних споруд, ані створення будь-яких нових споруд. Це перше. Друге, що стосується хрущовок, про які ви казали, вони не входять в цю територію, яку було запропоновано для проєктування. Тобто житлове будівництво, яке запропоновано по той бік вулиці Теліги, воно залишається поза межами конкурсного завдання, і лише позначити треба в певний спосіб ці пам'ятники, що вже стоять на цій території, але їх ніхто зносити не збирається. Що стосується того житлового будівництва, що ведеться прямо сьогодні на території проєктування, на колишньому єврейському цвинтарі комплекс Герцен-парк, ну, ми розуміємо, що це місце живе, і що в цьому місті будуть далі відбуватися різні події. І знов-таки це місце є пам'ятником не лише нацистському терору, не лише Голокосту, а і тому, що робила радянська влада, і що зараз робиться за часів незалежності. Тобто це пам'ятник живий, і меморіальний парк просто надає йому повних контурів. А як люди будуть використовувати цей меморіальний парк, як вони будуть в ньому існувати, ну це вже залежить навіть не архітекторів, а від свідомості і сумління нашого суспільства. Дякую.
Is it my turn? It's a very simple question. The competition participants obviously did a lot of research, and I was wondering if there were any possible similarities to other situations in the world, some aspect of this, either whether there's a recreational aspect and memorial site, or some general reluctance to recognize this, or some other aspect or part of this challenge that you may have found out in your research, and if so, how did they deal with it? So were there any other similarities? Was there something you could take from other examples?
Well, maybe just a quick comment. The Holocaust sites in particular have to deal with disappearance of traces. So the majority of the vast monuments or big monuments or well-known monuments that deal with Holocaust and were realized in the last 10 or 20 years tend to be dislocated, like, you know, the most famous perhaps being the Berlin one. So they are not in the site itself. I know that you asked me about similarities, but that's a big difference with the Babyn Yar project that's on the authentic spot. All the others, or most of the others, or at least the ones that I know, have been dislocated and in consequence are a little bit more isolated to their surroundings. So they're in the middle of the city, they're meant there to be, you know, remembered specifically, but are not as tied to the specifics of the location as this one. So I would say very shortly, no, it's a specific problem for this specific location, and needs to be, at least I'm not aware of any successful way that would be able to combine both of these functions that could be just taken and applied. We need to find it yet, I think.
I think one of the things that's kind of tricky about this project is it's not so much, there's a dislocation aspect, it's not so much a memorial to one specific event, because we're talking about a very long period of time. There's the event itself, there's the Soviets and what they did afterwards, and it's ongoing to this day. So I think, and just trying to think of analogies, I mean, one example I can come up with from my own country is in Washington, D.C., there's the Museum of African American History that just opened on the National Mall about a week ago. And I think that's a good example because, you know, there's a history of slavery in the United States, and a lot of slave labor actually was used to build Washington, D.C. and many of the monuments. And there's, you know, it's a very complicated history, and I think it's analogous a little bit in that way, in that there's a Jefferson Memorial, and Thomas Jefferson and George Washington were slave owners. Slaves helped to build the White House, and this is a new museum to these people who were enslaved that sits literally next to the White House. So I think in some sense it's analogous in that way, because Babyn Yar is about making drawing attention to a people who were oppressed and eventually, in this case, killed and murdered. So I think it's a little bit more of an analogy in that way. I don't think you can make a direct analogy to memorials because those are dislocated from a certain place. This is about something that's continuing and ongoing. It's about drawing attention to what's happening. So I would say it's kind of the best analogy I can think of is it's much more along the lines of, the people who were oppressed having something in the very location that the oppression happened to make a statement and to reclaim that space for themselves.
Considering the specificity of the Holocaust, to my knowledge, there is no other examples.
Дякую за увагу, Валерій Падяк. У мене таке запитання. До цього часу ви працювали як конкуренти, кожна команда виконувала певне завдання, але сьогодні, можливо не сьогодні, можливо дещо раніше, ви вже можете оцінити і також плюси, мінуси досягнення ваших, тобто інших команд. Чи плануєте ви в перспективі якось поєднати свої зусилля, чи плануєте ви, мабуть, використати спільний досвід в цьому плані побудови такого природнього парку, так, який би нам одночасно нагадував про те, що на цій поверхні або в цьому місці був яр. Яр сам по собі – це є природний катаклізм. Тобто це певна енергетика, яка зберігається на цьому місці, яка заставляє земну кулю або цю поверхню тріскати. І вона ніби кратер заглиблює нас. Це своєрідна природна могила. Без навіть того досвіду людства і навіть без досвіду сучасного Бабіну Яру, де на дні цієї природньої могили вже відбувалася трагедія, вона відбувалася не раз, кількаразово. Мені здаються дуже цікавими ваші знахідки кожної команди. Наприклад, оці сухі стовпи, мабуть, вони мають бути різної висоти для того, щоб підкреслити, що жертви були різного віку. І ці сухі стовпи, вони обов'язково символізують смерть, тобто там уже немає життя, але одночасно вони нас заглиблюють, вони дають нам можливість заглиблення, і якщо так символічно, вони дають нам можливість підійти, залишити якийсь там квітку, вінок, можливо, листа якогось тим, хто загинув на дні оцієї і природньої могили, і цієї братської могили. А з другого боку, маркування також, мабуть, дуже цікава знахідка, тому що вона дає нам можливість побачити сам оцей природний парк, чи навіть сам яр. Але мені здається, що автори зациклились на тому, що вони спробують маркувати територію яру незалежно від того, що найбільшою трагедією Бабіного Яру все ж таки була єврейська трагедія, трагедія людей, які там загинули за перші 2 дні. І це має бути якимось чином віддзеркалено. Я не знаю, чи це мають бордюри, чи може якісь дорожки, які будуть з'єднувати окремі частини парку, мають бути я не знаю, можливо, це метал буде, чи що, з прізвищ. Не обов'язково, щоб це була єврейська символіка, там, я не знаю, зірка Давида, чи, можливо, якісь інші, але з прізвищ, попри які ми будемо йти, чи, може, які будуть частиною тих доріжок, де ми постійно будемо звертати увагу на те, що тут домінують єврейські прізвища, що ми, власне, постійно стикаємося і заглиблюємося в історію цієї трагедії Холокосту, який пройшов через кожного із нас. В моєму селі це також історія Холокосту, як в кожному, мабуть, вона пройшла через душі і серця, мабуть, наших діда, баби, батьків. Ми про це пам'ятаємо, хоча ми не зазнали тих репресій і Голокосту, якого також зазнали наші сусіди, чи наші земляки, чи наші там, хто жив в нашому селі, чи в сусідніх селах теж. Дякую за увагу.
In our project, the first thing we tried to stay, how should I say, advocates of are the people that were murdered here. I mean, it's hard to say that you can be an advocate of those people as an architect, but I think that this is the first devotion the architect needs to have in this specific case, more than to the organizers, more than to the city authorities. You need to try to relate somehow to the victims themselves, and you can't do that really well if you don't know every single one of them. I mean, I'm always very careful in assigning to the victims, for instance, the surnames, because I don't think we can ever know all of the surnames that are there, and excluding a few would be, I think it would be problematic. We tried to engrave permanently the content that we are sure of, and the content that was there as a ground cause that the murders and the extermination happened where it happened. That's why we think that this is not a kind of a, flight into the objective. It's not just like marking some territorial phenomena, but it's marking of a weapon that caused basically what happened specifically there, specifically then. In my view, and I think I can speak for the group, we would be a little cautious to make the list, precisely because of the fear that you can never include everything, so you're making injustice to some. I would try to avoid that. I think you started your question with a question of what happens next. I'm not sure I or any of the teams here can answer to that, because it's not only up to us, but I can say for sure that if there will be some synergy in the project, then the project would have to be, not just addition of 3 different ideas, but it should be something that's it should go through a process. We couldn't just put the 3 things together and then we have the best of the 3 worlds. These are my 2 answers.
Well, although I'm not entitled to speak on the behalf of the entire jury, but I think I said it already. I wish that the 3 competitors that received the 3 first prizes, I would like them to continue to pursue their work, because I think that we told that some questions left unanswered. This is part of your interrogation. So I wish that they could continue, and probably with a new brief and more precise. I think that what has been done is a very good starting point. It's a very good starting point because it's acceptable for everybody. And it needs to be acceptable for everybody. It needs to be acceptable means, that every group that has suffered has to be involved in history. And then, of course, the Holocaust is different than mass murder. It's much more than that, But as a first step, the memorial status of Babyn Yar has to be accepted, not acceptable, accepted by everybody. This is, if it not, if it doesn't happen like this, it simply won't work. So, and I'm very comfortable to say that because I'm not involved in any, on any sides. So I just, yeah, it needs to be accepted by everybody. This is the first step. And then, and I wish the different participants that are close to me will be in a position to pursue their work.
I think that this question about the identity of the victims is something really important. I heard that the brief of the competition had been rewritten. I don't exactly know the reasons how it had been changed, but it's still a debate, and I think, yeah, I don't really know how to express this, but like there has to be a debate, and because the memorial intervention, there's a problem, for instance, with building new monuments, since the one that was built by the Soviets that were excluding that the fact that most of the victims were Jews. So I think it will be a debate that goes on permanently, because it's about interpretation, it's about how you tell a story, and it's something that it's not fixed and that is not resolved. So I think I don't know, another step of the competition of this process of changing, transforming this site is putting a lot of people around the table and debate about what needs to be done. But there is no unique response, I think.
On the subject of individuals, I do think it's very important, and our team felt it was very important to, as much as possible, identify the individuals involved, and not just by name, but by understanding that they were someone's mother, they were someone's sister or brother, they were part of a family, and whoever they were, and being able to understand that it wasn't 34,000 figures. 34,000 people becomes a statistic, it becomes incomprehensible. If you start to talk about it as all of the individuals and their lives, then you can start to understand the scope, hopefully, of this tragedy. So I think it's very, very important to understand names matter, but even more than names, it's about knowing who these people were as much as you can, and understanding, being able to understand them in relation to people who are in your life. This tragedy makes much more sense if I could imagine that it was my parents or people in my family or friends. And I think that's really critical to understanding what happened and to explaining it to other people.
Thank you so much for your work, for your thought-provoking designs. My question is as follows. There are many other unknown places of the unknown Holocaust across Ukraine and other areas. Do you think that in the future you'll be also working with the local or national authorities to commemorate those places that are even lesser known than Babyn Yar? Because Babyn Yar is a famous place. Some of those other areas will be virtually forgotten because no one knows what they even are. And secondly, do you think about other places around the world that have been also subjected to bloodshed, massacres, even genocides, that you would want to work with on such projects?
Yes, I think it's, well, I mean, the main question here is that there needs to be someone on the other side being prepared to actually commission these projects. And not only commission them, but also take them through which is a point that's always the most difficult one. If something is done on drawings and on renders, it feels as if, you know, we've done something, then we can move on, but it can become easily forgotten after the presentation that we're having just now. I think it's an extremely important task for an extremely difficult task for architect or a landscape architect to memorialize things that have been erased or have to basically create something that points to oblivion. That's the specifically Holocaust dilemma of how to make a monument, right, or to make a monument and so on, and in what manner. So I think it's a hugely problematic and hugely important task that, to my knowledge, hasn't been realized in many cases very efficiently or very successfully. In some cases, indeed, it has been, and I think it points to further thought work and then practical work by architects. I think that all of these places should have a specific approach to it. Yes, particularly regarding the site, but also particularly regarding also the specific histories of them. But as said, architects can only do so much. They can propose and they can design, but every monument or every design or every park that actually exists is a product of more than just a team of designers. It's a product of a will to actually execute it, and it's a product of a political consensus in the end.
I think in regards to your second question, you know, it's important to remember that we memorialize things for two primary reasons. One is to heal, and then the other one is to learn about what happened. And hopefully the point of learning about what happened is to prevent that from happening again. So I would hope that other tragedies and bloodshed around the world is memorialized, but I also hope people remember what's going on in the world today. We live in a world that has more refugees than there have been since World War II right now. And it's important, if we're talking about things to look at, not only to think about things that can be memorialized, but to look at what's going on in the world now and to take the lessons of the past and use them and to hopefully apply that knowledge to problems that we have today. Because I think we have very serious problems, and you know, it's kind of frightening when you researching for this competition and reading about how things happen. It's frightening some of the analogies you have with events that are going on today and the justifications people use for their inaction. And it's a little bit frightening how often that happens. So I hope that if we're memorializing things, we're also really learning from that and using those lessons in how we conduct ourselves now.
No, I do agree with Miloš that I think this question is more to the authorities, to the political representative than to us, because I think they are the one who will allow this story to emerge, and then we can work. But I think it's the first step is a political one.
Ще питання? Я хочу подякувати учасникам нашої презентації за те, що вони витримали такий марафон. І прошу їх зайняти свої місця в залі. Давайте їм подякуємо. Зі свого боку, я хочу надати останній шанс нашому уряду в особі міністра культури, який мені повідомили, щойно їде. І я прошу до першого заключного слова голову Ради директорів Української єврейської зустрічі пана Джеймса Темерта. Прошу.
I asked Beryl Rodal to join me in expressing his thoughts as well. I'm the chairman of the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter. He is a board member, and he is the chairman of the advisory council to the UJE. So I'm the Ukrainian Christian side of UJE. He's the Jewish representative with deep, may I say, Beryl, rabbinical connections, as his father was an Orthodox rabbi and his brother is currently the chief rabbi of Milan. Let me share with you the significant emotional connection that I have to this competition. Quite a few years ago, when we were at the very early stages of conceiving UJE, I was in Kiev together with Beryl and Alti Rodal for several days. And one of those nights, I found myself in the hotel room sleeping when a dreamlike vision or a vision-like dream appeared. And I saw skulls and I saw bones. Skulls and bones protruding from the ground. I came out of that dream or state and had no idea why this had to perturb my night. It wasn't until later, a couple of days later, we had decided, let's go see Babyn Yar. So we went to Babyn Yar, and I realized it was a premonition of that visit. So, since then, I've only had one, thankfully, other dream that brought to me the starkness of the Holocaust. And I have been free of those, and now I'm waiting for a dream that will show me that those bones and skulls are at peace. So, this competition was for me very important. And it seems to me that this competition, like UJE, is a work in progress and must continue into the future. One of the questioners talked about, what about the other killing fields in Ukraine, of which there are many hundreds? I can tell you that one such killing field is in Sambir in western Ukraine. And in the audience is another member of the UJE team, a director of the UJE team, Mark Fryman. Mark was formerly the president of the Canadian Jewish Congress. He has family that was murdered in Sambir together with 2,000 other Jews. And just this past Sunday, we were in Sambir with the mayor, with the entire Sambir City Council. Sambir is not a big place. It's a population of about 40,000. It's significant. And representatives of other organizations that were relevant to the discussion. Mark has been pursuing the resolution of a deep problem for 6 years. That deep problem is that some dozen years ago, a number of priests gathered together with citizens of Sambir at the killing site. And the killing site, by the way, is an ancient Jewish cemetery, a large plot of land, half of which was an appropriate, highly, properly developed Jewish cemetery. The other half was empty. The killing took place in the other half. The Jewish tombstones were destroyed and piled in one end of the former ancient Jewish cemetery. So what happened about a dozen years ago is they placed crosses in the area where the Jews were murdered and lie buried. Those crosses were placed there because subsequent to the killing of the Jews, the Nazis also killed a number of Ukrainian partisans, Roma, and even Italian pilots. So, with the best of intentions, the priests placed these three crosses. It's not appropriate to place crosses over a Jewish burial area. And so Mark has been working to resolve this very difficult question. And I and others have been helping to the extent that we can. So we went to this meeting, and I can tell you that after 2 hours of debating, we signed a simple memorandum, the second such memorandum that was signed. The first memorandum was not that long ago, that involved the hierarchies of both the Christian faith and the Jewish faith, who resolved to work towards a solution. This last memorandum on Sunday was sort of an agreement to come to an agreement based on the agreement that the religious authorities would come to, and we all agreed that we all respect our religious authorities, and we will abide by their decision. So hopefully Sambir will be an example that might be replicated in other places in Ukraine. And I thought I would say that by way of acknowledging Mark Freiman for his work, but also by way of answering the young woman who asked the question about what do we do with these other sites. As to the competition itself, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Vitaly Nachmanovich for his work on behalf of this competition. It's greatly appreciated. And I also would like to thank the jury, and especially Olivier Philippe for his work and for his moderating today. And my impressions of what we saw is each presentation was deeply sensitive and respectful of Babyn Yar. Each presentation dealt with very, very difficult questions. It's not possible to amalgamate the three and make one, but from each we can learn something that ultimately, hopefully, will resolve itself in a way that we can memorialize the sacred ground that is Babyn Yar. It's going to take some time. These things are not simple. If Sambir has been taking 6 years, and that's a town of 40,000, Kyiv, where they were not three crosses, but seems like several dozens of different memorials already exist, renders that task much more complicated. So I would like to thank the competitors and congratulate each of them. I was struck by the eloquence, the articulation of the people who spoke to us, both during their presentations and the thoughtful answers that they gave to the questions that were posed. For me, it's been an important experience. I thank you very much, and the work continues. I turn it over for some words from my friend Beryl.
My first observation is very personal. What you heard from Jim, I should say James, Constantine Temerty, is as good a reflection of the Ukrainian Jewish encounter as any I can think of. It expresses the spirit, the purpose, the dimensions, and the aspirations for which UJE was set up, led by Jim, who is the chairman, and motivated by a deep love, a proper religious spirit, I think, and a strong sense that Ukraine is on a path that needs to be sustained, and dealing empathetically but accurately and truthfully with the past is a large part of the future, needs to be. Babyn Yar, I'm not going to make a speech about Babyn Yar. You've heard a lot over the last few days, and Babyn Yar is very complex and changing. It's, the sages of the Mishnah teach that just because the task is difficult and you may not be able to complete it, doesn't mean that you're free from the obligation to take it up. You are under an obligation to take it up. But Babyn Yar is part of a living city and a living part of a living city, a modern city with a metro station at the heart of it. That has to be taken into account. Babyn Yar has also become an international symbol of something. In former times, we should say, a special term, when you said Holocaust or Shoah, what came to mind was the gates of Auschwitz. We now think of the Holocaust in a somewhat different way. Next to Auschwitz is Babyn Yar. Babyn Yar being the icon of the Holocaust by bullets, as Patrick Desbois calls it, but a very different approach to the Shoah, which was retail. Every killer saw his victim, victims saw their killers. And it took place 2.5 or so million such people across Ukraine, Belarus, and a number of other countries, Russia, but principally in Ukraine. So it's symbolic, iconic of that. That has to be taken into account, not only by people in Ukraine, but people around the world think about Babyn Yar as the symbol of the Shoah itself, another aspect of it. For Ukraine, even where the specificity of the Holocaust is fully recognized, the moment you say the Shoah began in a certain way at Babyn Yar, once you acknowledge the importance, specificity of the place, you also have to take into account other people. And to do this in a way that doesn't bury, diminish, relativize the Shoah. Tricky, very tricky. And so the task that confronted the contestants, I should say more than competitors, the task was not a simple one. And it's part of the Ukraine in progress that is coming to be, as I say, in the middle of a city that works. So I was quite moved by the skill, the sensitivity above all shown by those who participated in the competition and being alive to all of this. But as I say, and as one of the questioners pointed out, it's something that symbolizes but also points the way to something that needs to happen in many, many places, villages, towns, and cities across Ukraine. So thank you very much for making us even more alive and aware of the dimensions of the challenge, and in some cases, literally lighting the way to working things out. My thanks.
Шановні колеги, я знову хочу подякувати всім і мушу визнати, що українська держава в чергове не встигла на 75-ті роковини Бабиного Яру. Міністр культури перебуває на бюджетному комітеті. Більше співробітників Міністерства культури немає, тому ми залишимо питання без відповіді. Чи долучиться українська держава до втілення запропонованих проєктів? У мене все. Я прошу до слова професора Милоша.
Моє слово дуже коротко. My comments are very brief, simply because we are about to close this session. But before so, one brief logistical piece of information that my colleague, Dr. Ihor Ščupak, needs to share with you. So I will ask him just to make that one brief logistical comment, and then we will close the session. Dr. Ščupak.
Дорогі друзі, по-перше, я маю приємність всіх запросити на гарний обід з ковбасками кошерними, який буде о 1-й годині тут на 3-му поверсі. Це абсолютно для всіх присутніх. По-друге, я хочу запросити на невеличку інформативну нараду учасників молодіжного проєкту з різних країн. I'd like to invite to foreign participants of yours project to small meeting here in lobby near bar. Now for a few minutes. І оголошення ще таке. Для учасників молодіжного проєкту. Після обіду буде лекція для всіх Нормана Наймарка о 14:30 початок. Потім, я нагадаю, розподіляємось по групам і йдемо по тих групах, які у нас є у розкладі. І потім для молодіжного проєкту о 17:30 від'їжджають автобуси до Національної опери. Ви пам'ятаєте, про який захід йдеться. Отже, зараз, now, a small meeting with foreign participants of yours project here. З 1-ї години ми запрошуємо всіх на обід. We invite to the lunch now at 1 o'clock. And thank you very much.
This actually, I'm entering into my last day of having to do this kind of work, and I am already being helped. There's nothing else for me to say because everything has been announced. Smacznoho, bon appetit.